where we're marching because we are standing in solidarity with many Americans and communicating our huge disapproval with this president. A president who's said awful things during London's lowest moments of terrorism, who has attacked our democratically elected Mayor Sadiq Khan, a president who has retweeted far-right hatred of Britain First, the hatred that saw the death of Joe Cox. For all of those reasons and so much more, people are coming out in droves today to make it absolutely clear that Donald Trump is not welcome in our country. I don't think any of us could have believed that a man full of such bile, such hatred, such evil would get his hands on what at its best is the beacon of freedom in the world. And so this presidency is worse than any of us could ever have imagined. It's obviously a disaster for the United States, but it's a huge disaster for the international community as he tears up climate change, as he reintroduces tariffs, as he says no to the UN and their human rights regime. I think that Theresa May has been terribly humiliated today. She has looked like an appeaser, a sycophant, as someone she should rightly condemn for his statements today in the Sun, his statements about Britain, his statements about our mayor. She should condemn it instead of holding his hands. Trump should not be meeting our great monarch. He should not be meeting the Queen. He doesn't deserve it. The offer of this trip was premature in the first place.
David Lammy, a British politician, delivered a scathing critique of Donald Trump's visit to the UK, expressing strong disapproval of the then US president. However, upon closer analysis, it becomes evident that Lammy's rhetoric is not merely a matter of political disagreement, but is laden with personal attacks, subjectivity, and a lack of the objectivity expected from a public figure. While his criticism of Trump's comments on terrorism in London or the tragic murder of Joe Cox may seem valid to some extent, Lammy overgeneralizes and attributes the complexity of global issues entirely to one individual. This approach not only weakens the legitimacy of his argument, but also reflects a lack of maturity in addressing such matters. Additionally, Lammy's use of extreme language, referring to Trump as full of hatred or evil, undermines the seriousness of his message. Such inflammatory language is unbecoming of a responsible politician discussing the leader of a key allied nation. His condemnation of Theresa May, calling her an appeaser or a sycophant, simply because she did not act according to his expectations, further highlights a lack of respect for political colleagues and the leader of his own government. These statements not only tarnish Lammy's credibility, but also diminish his standing on the international stage, as they shift focus from substantive policy critiques to personal and emotional attacks. Furthermore, Lammy's insistence that Trump does not deserve to meet the Queen or engage with British institutions reveals an arrogant and narrow perspective on diplomacy. Regardless of personal disagreements, the role of the U.S. president and the bilateral relationship between the two nations transcend individual opinions. By framing such interactions as undeserved, Lammy demonstrates a lack of understanding of the broader implications of diplomatic engagement. His remarks appear petty and overly personalized, raising questions about his own maturity in navigating political discourse. In conclusion, while David Lammy's speech might resonate as a call for democracy and justice, it fails to maintain the objectivity, restraint, and respect necessary in diplomatic and political discussions. Rather than emphasizing well-founded policy critiques, his comments devolve into emotional and polarizing rhetoric. This ultimately detracts from his credibility and reduces his argument to an example of how excessive personalization and bias can weaken a politician's message on the global stage.
Before we come to the next statement, could I say to the government, that I understand and the whole House understands that the business of the government goes on during the recess, and that ministers will always need to respond to events in the UK and around the world. However, it is frustrating for honourable members on both sides of the House where major planned announcements are scheduled during periods when the House is not sitting, particularly towards the end of recess. Ministers should come to the House to announce their policies in the first instance, if that means waiting a few days. And the excuse that we may have an election elsewhere in the world is not my concern, because it is the elected members in this House on both sides that I represent. Secretary of State David Lammy.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful for your instructions at the beginning of this statement, and with permission I will make a statement on the conclusion of negotiations on the exercise of sovereignty over the British Indian Ocean Territory.
David Lammy, in this particular instance, has showcased a remarkable lack of sensitivity and responsibility, leaving many questioning his capacity as a leader. His failure to adhere to the basic principles of parliamentary accountability, coupled with his apparent disregard for the importance of the Speaker's reprimand, speaks volumes about his approach to the role he occupies. When Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle, a figure representing the sanctity and order of parliamentary proceedings, felt compelled to rebuke him so openly, it underscored the level of frustration caused by Lammy's conduct. Instead of embracing the opportunity to demonstrate leadership, humility, or a willingness to engage constructively, Lammy's response was tepid and dismissive, leaving the impression of a politician more interested in preserving personal convenience than fulfilling public duty. The issue at hand, the sovereignty over the British Indian Ocean Territory, is not a trivial matter. It touches upon significant questions of international relations, national sovereignty, and historical responsibility. For a minister to treat such a topic with anything less than utmost seriousness reflects a troubling lack of commitment to the high stakes of his office. Lammy's handling of this moment, marked by reluctance and a lack of conviction, is not just disappointing. It is emblematic of a broader failure to recognize the weight of his role. Instead of providing a clear, robust explanation to the elected representatives of the people, he seemed more inclined to offer a surface-level compliance with parliamentary protocols, as though he were merely going through the motion. His dismissive attitude, epitomized by his implicit "not my concern" approach, demonstrates an alarming detachment from the very principles of democracy he is meant to uphold. Parliament exists as a forum for accountability, debate, and representation of the people's interests. By failing to respect this platform, Lammy not only diminishes his own credibility, but also insults the institution itself. His actions suggest a politician who prioritizes optics over substance, personal comfort over collective responsibility, and avoidance over accountability. When contrasted with the Speaker's firm and principled stance, Lammy's inadequacies become even more glaring. Sir Lindsay Hoyle rightly reminded the government, and by extension Lammy, of the fundamental duty of ministers to respect the House and its elected members. This was not merely a procedural correction, but a defense of the integrity of the democratic process. Lammy's failure to meet this standard reflects poorly not only on him as an individual, but also on the broader image of governance he is supposed to represent. Ultimately, politicians like David Lammy, if they continue down this path of disengagement and superficiality, will not only lose the trust of the public, but also erode the democratic framework they are sworn to protect. Leadership requires more than presence. It requires conviction, respect for institutions, and a genuine commitment to serving the people. On all these counts, Lammy's performance in this instance has fallen woefully short. If he is to regain public confidence, he must fundamentally reassess his priorities, approach, and attitude toward the responsibilities of his office. Thanks for watching. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the content. Share your feedback in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with our latest videos. Also, join our free Telegram group link in the description for uncensored discussions on important issues.